You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 431 of the podcast. And in this one, I chat with Paul Huntingford. Paul is an integrative therapist and sees clients through the Integrative Centre for OCD Therapy. We discuss his therapy story, addiction and anxiety, what is acceptance, the many opportunities to practice acceptance in OCD recovery, including acceptance of the feelings, acceptance of the process, acceptance of the presence of thoughts, conditional acceptance, acceptance of the work to be done, acceptance of relapses, and much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So thank you so much to Paul for coming on and sharing his insight in this area. And of course, thank you to you guys, as always, for listening. It means a lot, and I hope you're well. And without further ado, here is Paul. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thanks for having me, Stuart.
Yeah, it's good to have you on.
Yeah, good to see
obviously,
you.
we work together. At the Integrative Centre for OCD Therapy. So I'm sure I would have said that into the introduction for everyone. But yeah, so obviously I know your therapy story, but it'd be good to hear your therapy story, like what got you into being a therapist and then ultimately OCD.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a long one, obviously, but I'm going to try and keep it a bit shorter and relative to OCD recovery and anxiety, my issues with anxiety and just my journey of kind of therapy so far, I'd say. So I guess I started when I was younger. I was this kind of, I suppose I remember when I went to school, or big school at like 7, being terrified, absolutely terrified of all the bigger boys, all that kind of, and I remember I was this kind of weird mix of really outrageous in the classroom and then where I felt safe, and then terrified outside it. And this was something that kind of happened throughout my school career. And I thought that was kind of strange. And I just remember living with this fear every day. And that kind of started at 7 and kind of went through it as I was growing up. Now, when I hit 7, 8, my parents divorced, and that was because I didn't know at the time, but I did know, but I can't remember. There was a lot of kind of violence at home with my dad and my mum and towards me. My dad was an alcoholic. So I was growing up around that. So looking back now, I know that what was happening was I imagine what was happening. There was a lot of violence at home. I was terrified of men, bigger boys, those kind of things. And I was kind of primed for danger. And so my experience growing up was I was always on the lookout for danger, basically. And I found this through therapy, really. I mean, I didn't find this out. I knew that it was going on, but I didn't really discover the stuff about my dad, I don't think, until, I mean, I knew I didn't like him, which is since I've kind of worked through, but I don't think that shifted until, I mean, late, who knows, maybe it'll come out later in the story. So that kind of continued. And so as I hit 16, I remember I felt kind of safer in school, but I found drinking and drugs. Found drinking a bit earlier than 16, and I found something that kind of made me feel safe, made me feel okay, made me feel free, and so that became like my go-to treatment, as it were. And I got into drinking and drugging relatively often, as people do. And is very prevalent in our culture. And so it was kind of acceptable, but I was also aware that what I was doing was kind of a bit over and above what was acceptable, and I was getting myself in quite a lot of trouble. And around that time, when I left school, went to university, like my avoidance started kicking in. I started to get really anxious. I remember one of my first jobs was in a Pizza Express, and I could no longer take the trays towards the table. So I was kind of like shaking as I was bringing trays towards the table, things like that. And I felt like this was just me. I've got this anxiety. And from that point, I made a decision, right, I'm no longer going to take trays to the table. I'm no longer going to do things in front of other people. And so I just started actively from that point making my life smaller and smaller. So I'd take jobs where no one would see my hands move, or no one would see me doing things. And that kind of grew from there. And then when I was at university, that kind of progressed. Obviously, was drinking heavily at university. I was taking more drugs. I would avoid going to anything where I'd have to speak, putting my hand up, asking questions. I just was retreating in certain scenarios, and in scenarios where I was out drinking, life and soul of the party. But that was where I kind of had my relief. But in life, I was just it was just getting smaller and smaller. So that kind of continued on. I left university. I got a degree. It was in psychology. So I was pleased to do that, although I wasn't engaged with it at the time. And then after that, I actually tried to study to become a clinical psychologist and get on that training. Worked 6 months on a psychiatric ward, and then went into a graduate mental health worker role. And in that role, I remember I was working, and I had to give these presentations, and I just couldn't. Part of me was like, I don't want to do this job, but there was a big part of me was like, I just don't want to stand up in front of people and speak. I just can't. I can't do it. So I sacked that in, and then from that period on, every 6 months I was changing career. I was like moving. I couldn't stay in anything. At any job I went where I was around older guys, like I got a job working in the city for a bit, and I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified, and I couldn't do the presentations. I was doing everything I could to kind of get out of that. So I left, went and did something else, worked in film industry, and I was just kind of changing. And then at 26, at that point, I did have a period of therapy. My first period of therapy, I've been put on antidepressants at 21, which kind of helped for my symptoms, but didn't really help for much else. Plus, I was still using at the time. And then I had a period of CBT therapy, maybe 6 sessions when I was kind of 24, because I kept on changing jobs. And I thought, I need to sort this out. And the guy gave me, it was one at the time where I just got given a load of forms, and I could not get my head around like writing out forms and doing those kind of things at that time. I wasn't interested. I just wanted something to kind of like, oh, take this away. And I wasn't really reflecting on sessions at all. So didn't really help. And then 26, my drinking had progressed where my blackouts were really quite bad. Actually, some of my behavior got better, but I just was terrified about what could have happened in a blackout. And I decided to go to AA. A friend of mine directed me there, and I went to AA, and I started going, and I heard like a positive, hopeful message. And I started going to young persons meetings because I was 26 at the time. And I started to see that recovery was possible. And that was something that really spoke to me. So I started going, I went to lots of meetings. I heard the message, going lots of meetings. And that's what I wanted, because I didn't want to be like my dad. I didn't want the stuff that was happening. I kind of knew that I was going to end up dead or in prison, basically, was the way I was going. And there was part of me that didn't want that. And so at 26, I was in AA, started following that program. And looking back on that now, that was the start of my kind of own ERP, because I was kind of in a situation where you kind of in a room where you have to share in front of people, you have to be vulnerable in front of people. There's a lot of men, a lot of older guys. And so I was going into meetings and having kind of these, before a meeting, I'd have, like, now I know it's somatic flashbacks, kind of shaking, convulsing with nerves before going into this situation. And yet there was something that I wanted. So I went in and would share, would speak to people, would share honestly, and actually be accepted by these guys, which is a huge part of my recovery. It's kind of like making friends with older men who, weren't scary, didn't scare me, and kind of feeling accepted in that way. So that was massively healing. And so I've just been following that path ever since. And, that was 16 years ago, over 16 years ago now. And I'd say I found a career by following my heart and following what I was interested in. I got into exercise, and then I started PTing when I was 30. I started on my 30th birthday and then started a career as a PT. And that kind of involved like physical change, mental change, and was kind of like living that healthy lifestyle that I was living right then. And at that time, I was able to do more stuff in front of people because I'd done the exposures of like slowly going back in. 2 years into my recovery, I remember I was working at a bowling alley and I was waiting behind this I was on reception, because I was still kind of reception safe. I don't have to show my hands. And then one night I was so bored. I was like, I'm just going to take a tray out. I'm just going to see what this is like to take a tray out. And I took the tray out and I was like, oh my God, my hands aren't shaking. Like, I've been living for 14 years with my hands shaking and paranoid about it, and it's not happening. And I was like, oh my God, my life could change. And so I was just kind of followed that. And that kind of gave me the belief to kind of try other things and follow other things. And that's from when my life started getting bigger. And I started taking more risks. So then studying as a PT, continuing in recovery, working as a PT, running my own business. And as a PT, I was always more interested in the psychological change. The physical change is one thing, but I was more interested in like how we actually change. So I was always doing kind of coaching courses or and following that route and reading around that. And so then I got married in a very compulsive, addictive way, very quickly, way too quickly. I got married to someone I shouldn't have, although now I know that actually the reason I'm happily married now is because I had that relationship. So, everything happens for a reason. So when that marriage is kind of on the way out, which is another topic in itself, I started to go. I was like, I need to go to therapy to explore this. So I went to therapy, and I remember in the first session, the therapist, he did a kind of classic thing, which I didn't know he was doing. And somebody was like, and what does that remind you of? And who does that remind you of? And I was like, oh my God, I married my dad. And it was just like, it was such a realization that was what was happening in the relationship. And, I kind of often think about that because I think, God, I hope I could be that good a therapist, have that effect on someone in the first session, hope that happens at some point. So after that, I was kind of going to therapy. I went for about a year, and then I decided I'm going to train as a therapist. So I just started training as a therapist. That was 2016. And then, this has been my journey since training. I met Johnny training, and Johnny and I kind of hit it off, I think, because we were both kind of behaviorally based. Going through AA is quite a behavioral, you do things and you take risks and you notice changes. And Johnny was the same. Johnny actually introduced me to ACT. And all that kind of stuff. And so that really spoke to me, and we hit it off because I think, that was just the way we kind of integrated our approach. And so that's a big part of my own recovery, and also my approach now. And after qualification, what's happened? I've worked in day habs. Been working with lots of people coming out of rehabs for addiction, lots of people with families from addiction, and yeah, it's been a good journey. And then kind of starting work with you guys at the Integrative Centre for OCD, and joined you when you began last year, and now kind of focusing on obviously private practice, but OCD work as well, which I think brings in a lot of although it's similar, there's part of me which kind of has I feel like has quite a deep understanding of obsessions, compulsions, certainly anxiety, and how that kind of inner process work, and what's that like to be, you know, all the shame and stuff that goes along with hiding behaviors and all that kind of stuff that's there. So I feel like very grateful to be working with the OCD community now, and yeah, it's been good to start.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you for being so open and vulnerable.
Mm.
Obviously, I learned a lot there. I didn't know about your past, so that's really interesting.
Mm.
And good for you for getting sober and staying sober and living your life. Today we're going to talk about sort of the opportunities or the many opportunities to practice acceptance in OCD recovery. This is obviously a topic you wanted to cover, so it's great to be able to do that. So I thought initially, like, what is acceptance to you? What does that word mean?
Well, I mean, I chose this topic because I think acceptance is, there's obviously so much in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is one of the therapies we integrate a lot at the center. But there's also, you know, the first step of recovery is about acceptance. You know, it's about accepting the fact that you're an alcoholic and you've got a problem. And I think the first step of any kind of recovery for anything is accepting, actually, this isn't working for me anymore. You know, and so that's a type of acceptance, is kind of accepting that is the case, that actually what the function of this and what it used to do for me, relieve anxiety, get me through the day, whatever it is actually now causing me more problems than it's solving. So that's the kind of first step. And it's, you know, it's been around, it's not just part of recovery. I mean, acceptance and commitment therapy is Buddhist influence. And so acceptance from that perspective is acceptance of things the way they are, you know, acceptance of thoughts, feelings, images, you know, all the things that are ourselves, and how do we work that? So there's loads of it. So there's many different aspects of it. So, and I think acceptance can mean lots of different things at different points of our day, our recovery. And yeah, so I just wanted to kind of explore a bit of that now. And I think it's you know, there's one reading that I remember from AA, and it's like a doctor telling his story. And some of the AA stuff is very Christian, but I always remember there was a passage in his story, and he says, "Oh, and acceptance is the answer to all our problems." Now, I don't really believe that, but there's some of that which is true. Like, there's a lot about acceptance, which is actually, if we can accept what's going on right now, then it's okay. If we can't, we got a problem. And there may be moments when things are happening that are unacceptable. And I totally see that. But the reality is that a lot of time, particularly when we're dealing with anxiety, it's fear of the future or something that's happened in the past. And actually, right here, right now, it's okay. My heart might be going out of my chest. I might be terrified about something that's going to happen, but right here, right now, I'm still alive. I can see what's going on around me. And that's, I feel, really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Good way to look at it. And I think, you know, as you talk there, what comes to my mind is, if we think about addiction, it's obviously very hard to give up the addiction. And same in OCD, it's not an addiction, but in a similar vein, it's hard to give up the compulsions because they've worked for us on some level for so long. And just maybe, you know, anything you want to say about acceptance around that?
100%. And I think that not only hard because it's the work they've worked for you for so long, it's also that the fear is so big that it feels like, okay, well, if I don't do the compulsion, then I'm going to be overwhelmed, and that is terrifying. So it's acceptance over that. It's not only acceptance that the compulsion is no longer working. It's acceptance over, like, oh my God, I've got this dread in my stomach around this, and I have to sit with that. And that is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So there's some other points you shared with me around opportunities to practice this. Do you want to go through them, or do you want me to sort of ask them as a prompt?
You can, whichever you think is best. I mean, it's your podcast. What do you think would work
So
best?
you go through it, and then
the other thing
I'll jump in.
I've got, actually. So there's this point that I was thinking that acceptance, obviously, I think there's part of us which thinks, certainly in recovery, right, I'll do the ERP and I'll accept it, and then boom, I'm done. That's good. Accepted. I'm okay. It's not going to come back. And I think acceptance is actually a really hard process. It's not something that comes straight away. It's something that we have to actually work at. It's part of the it's the last stage of the grief process. So we can't get to acceptance straight away. And the we're kind of like dipping in and out of all those stages. And so I think the first thing to be aware of is that, yeah, that's kind of what we're hoping for, but it's not necessarily going to be easy to get there. It's quite hard. It's hard graft, because we have to put ourselves in those situations where be willing to experience the fear, be willing to experience the terrifying images that are coming up. So I think that's one thing to kind of really be aware of, is that, yeah, it's what we're looking for, but it is a hard process and potentially quite a long journey as well.
Yeah, good point. And what do you think someone with OCD is accepting? Like what or is it they need to accept?
In terms of recovery process,
Sorry.
yeah. I think in terms of recovery process, that it might be it's not going to be a straightforward journey. There's going to be ups and downs around it. There's going to be, people who've been on the journey for a long time will know that. But I think once you're in therapy as well, it's like bumpy. You'll get victories, and then actually something will come along, the kind of whack-a-mole effect, and then actually you get knocked back a bit, and that can be really disheartening, because we're kind of in that zone of like, oh yeah, I've got this, this is, I've nailed it, and then out of nowhere there's a trigger, or something happens, or life event, or stress, and then we get knocked over, and that can be really, really disheartening. So I think that's certainly one area to accept, so that it'll be up and down. There might be a long journey. I think potentially that the obsessions might not go away as well. Like we kind of might be having to that they might be there. Sometimes they obviously dissipate, but that can be kind of coming in from like an agenda of not having it anymore. I don't know what your thoughts are on that one.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's human to have those thoughts, right? It's not necessarily OCD. It's a human. Most humans, if not all, have intrusive thoughts. And I think if we're trying to get rid of them completely, we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure. It's more, can I live my life even in the presence of them and any feelings? And then eventually they probably will go down, but we don't want to have that as like the key goal.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that's often sometimes what people are hoping for is that that won't happen. And so it's how do we work with that in session and kind of manage expectations around that. And it's about I think that comes up a lot around feelings as well, not just images. It's around I don't want to feel anxious ever, and that's definitely not going to happen.
Was that cliche saying, if you've got to feel to heal? And in OCD or anxiety generally, as you would have experienced when you went through all that anxiety, the more we resist it, struggle with it, i.e. not accept it, the more we get of it. That's the paradox, the cruel paradox. Whereas when we accept it, make space for it, allow it to be there, don't have to like it, but just make peace with it, it starts to diminish.
Yeah. No, that's a big part of it, is the knowledge that we don't have to like it to accept it. You can actually, definitely not want it there, and yet still accept it. But it's a different outlook to it.
That reminds me of that. Well, sorry, Paul, jump in there. Like, it reminds me of the act metaphor of the jerk at the party, or he gets called by another name, but that's what I call it. about
where you let him into the house and
yeah.
if you're trying to keep him out, he's outside the house. And if, yeah,
Yeah, and you're
yeah,
using all your energy, you're not enjoying the
mm,
party, you're getting more and more stressed and annoyed at this person. But when you let them in, assuming that they're not dangerous, you're a bit annoyed you had to let them in. But what you're now able to do is engage with your life, with the party, with dancing, drinking, having fun, whatever it is. Um, and yeah, you'll forget the jerks there. You
yeah,
might see them again and remember, and it triggers you and pisses you off, but you
yeah.
engage again and then you forget again. And then,
Mm,
yeah,
mm.
similar.
But I think that what you just said there about seeing the jerk again, that's an important part to
Yeah.
work on acceptance as well, that it probably is going to happen. So there might be a relapse at some point, and
Yeah.
it's hopefully how do we prepare for that, or be strong enough in the skills, like know what we're doing when um, know what's happening when OCD is there, and then
Mm.
know how to look after ourselves when that's happening as well.
Yeah, spot on.
Mm. Mm.
Mm.
Yeah. I would say it's the one of the other things that kind of commonly comes up is the kind of which isn't acceptance, is a kind of pseudo acceptance, which is I can accept this feeling as long as it kind of goes away. So the kind of conditional
Yeah.
acceptance of like, okay, so it's I can do this in the session, like I accept it, I accept the feelings, but it's still here next week. And then actually
Yeah.
there's more anger, more resistance there the next week. And that can be quite tricky to kind of work around and get to that level of acceptance. Like, okay, it's this the anxiety is not going to not necessarily going anywhere, or the fear.
Yeah, you're right. And I see that a lot with my clients, especially the teen ones, and they're like, okay, yeah, I can allow this. I can accept it. And then they're like you're saying, like an hour later, they're saying, "Oh no, it was still there." An hour later, I'm like, "Well, were you checking for it? Were you keeping an eye out for it to see if it was if in which case you're not truly accepting it? Because when you accept something, you no longer keep checking for it. It's just done.
Yeah,
It's done. I've allowed it. It's done. Um, so yeah, I think there's like as you're saying that conditional acceptance or that partial acceptance even.
yeah,
Um, um, and I guess that brings my mind because I imagine some people don't like the word acceptance. Um, and I think that's where I will use the word acceptance sometimes, but I think I also use sort of making space, making room, allowing as alternative words and phrases.
mm.
That
Yeah. My wife was. I was talking to my wife before the podcast, and she was like, "I hate the word acceptance." So she's one of those, and she prefers cooperate. Like she was cooperating with
okay.
her anxiety, which I like, which doesn't necessarily work with kind of like the OCD anxiety as
Yeah.
much, but um, it works for her. So, but yeah, there's definitely a resistance to that. I don't think from the acceptance that I'm talking about, like
Mm,
makes room for difficult feelings, but there's also acceptance about
yeah,
other aspects,
that's true. Yeah.
in terms of, well, maybe I'm coming from an addiction point there, but um, yeah, maybe there's another part. It's like, in terms of OCD recovery, accepting other people for the way they are. Like if we've got friends
Mm,
or relatives helping us support in OCD recovery, and they're no longer accommodating. It's like,
mm,
how do you accept that they're behaving differently now? How is
mm,
that when you're in fear and and that's happening? That's really tricky.
yeah. Yeah, because when family members change or loved ones or friends, it can sometimes be anger there, right? That
Yeah.
they've changed. I'm not getting my needs met in terms of reassurance, and that can be very frustrating for people.
Mm.
Which I'm sure is exactly the same in addiction, right? Of
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's a lot of often big family changes. Sometimes people don't
mm,
like they want the family members to change, and when they do change, there's an issue as well. So
mm,
yeah, very very similar in that respect. And a lot of kind of enabling goes on in addiction as well. And similar with OCD, like don't realize that that's an unhelpful behavior, but it's kind of reinforcing all
yeah,
the obsessions. Yeah. Mm.
Okay. Yeah, good point. Um, and you talk about pace of recovery as well. So like, is that accepting the pace that it's not always going to go as quickly or as straight
Yeah, I
lined as you want?
think so. Like kind of how quickly it is. Sometimes it obviously can be very quick,
Mhm.
and other times it's not as quick as you like. And sometimes it's kind of what are we what are the expectations of it? Are we kind of looking to reduce like symptoms, reduce compulsions, or again, it's that kind of conditional acceptance of getting rid of from that agenda.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, hopefully we have quick recovery and good results, but it's not always that way. Um, just thought actually maybe another word for acceptance is kind of awareness, an
Mm.
awareness of what's going on, which is also
Yeah.
a mindful term.
Yeah, without
Um,
judgment, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the one of the other things was the kind of comedy comes up is the kind of secondary spike aspect. So there's okay, I've done the first bit of my accepting my ERP and work the skills around that, and yeah,
Mm.
and then something else comes in. Either it's like, did I do that right, or what's I'm doing, and that kind of secondary spike comes in, and that's a difficult thing. Is like, I've got to work it again, and accepting that it's
Mm.
again, it's not that one and done thing. It's kind of like, okay, we got to keep working at this, and just be aware, be gently aware of what's happening.
Yeah, that's because, even before you joined us, you were using ACT quite a lot, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and ACT is very much heavy on experiential work and practicing the skills. And I've seen this quite a lot in my clients, and it's my fault because I haven't emphasized the importance of practicing it regularly, the skills.
Mm.
And but this idea of, oh, I did dropping anchor a couple of times and it didn't really work. And it's like, well, yeah, but you did OCD 50 million times today
Yeah.
in terms of compulsions and rumination and obsessions. We need to do this skill 50 million times as well. Otherwise, it's
Mm.
not going to have an impact. It's like chucking a cup of water on a bonfire. It's just not going to put it out. It's just going to evaporate. So I guess something, maybe I'm asking you something about acceptance of the work that needs to be done. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's something like it needs to be done regularly, right?
Mm.
Every as much as possible. As you say, it's kind of can be firing with you, it can be with you all day, every day. So actually, if we need to be prepared to work the skills, but often find that's kind of overwhelming for clients,
Yeah.
to go, okay, so actually breaking it down, going, okay, I'm going to spend 10 minutes focusing on it today, and the
Yeah.
rest I'm going to kind of let it go a little bit. And I think that can be really helpful
Mm.
because then you can just eat into that 15 minutes. Going back to the like my addiction background, often they say, well, how much effort did you put into drinking? Were you drinking every day? Yeah. Well, can you do some recovery every day? And
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
And actually, it was my experience. Actually, the more effort I put into my recovery, well, feel like I've got a strong recovery, obviously now, but
Yeah.
I did at the beginning. But I put in a lot of work at the beginning. The foundations were strong, and um, it definitely helps, with this behavioral stuff. Like the more we do it, as you say, we've done it 50 million times. We need to, hopefully not 50 million times, but if we
Yeah.
can kind of catch it, we can become more aware and then just bring ourselves back when we notice doing it again. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Yeah, we need to do it enough to develop the skill and then we do it automatically as and
Yeah.
when we need it. Kind of like an
Yeah.
antivirus software, I view it as,
Yeah.
the OCD comes in and the antivirus software comes in, which
Yeah.
is the skills automatically. But
Yeah.
um yeah, you're right. With ERP, we set it for whatever, 10, 30 minutes, an hour a day. And same with act skills, like you're saying, just can you do 10 minutes of this a day and
Mm.
just practice it that way? Yeah, it's more
Mm.
manageable.
Yeah, definitely.
And relapse. So let's just talk about acceptance around relapse. So obviously, when people do have relapses, sometimes it can really set them back and they feel like they've failed or they've learned nothing or whatever it is. And that's obviously not the case. But just, yeah, anything you want to say around accepting that there will be relapses from time to time?
I think relapse is a really important important topic. In my work in addiction, relapse is obviously a big issue. It's actually a very serious issue. There are a lot of people who don't come back from relapses, and actually a lot of people who do end up committing suicide after relapse, and some of that is compounded by the shame that comes up around relapse in some ways, and from what I've observed. And so I think it's really important to show as much compassion as possible. So I work a lot with compassion with clients as well, being easy, like validating it, mentioning like what did we learn from that experience? What did you take away from it? But definitely being easy with yourself around relapse and showing yourself as much compassion as possible, because it is part of it. And we can't have that necessarily whatever the perfect recovery is. We're human. There's mistakes we feel as human beings, and all we can do is kind of gently bring ourselves back on track as and when we realize we're off.
That's a great way of putting it, and I think great for the big ruminators who are listening right now, because we can often get pulled away a lot, and then we notice we've been ruminating for an hour or whatever it is and beat ourselves up. Well, how did I get caught in that again? And as you're saying there, it's like, no, it's okay. What's important is you've caught it now. Don't beat yourself up. Let's just try again. Or as Johnny says, slip and recommit.
Yeah.
I like that phrase.
Yeah, that's really good. And that's that whole kind of the mindfulness theory is that like every time we bring our attention back to the present moment, we're training that muscle. Oh, we caught it. Great. Okay, good. Okay, go again. And your brain's going to be off doing what it's doing. And then, oh, right. Okay, come back to the present moment.
Yeah, that's true. It reminds me of, it's very cliche, but like, or cheesy, but Michael Jordan, when that advert he did, and he's like, I've missed over however many thousand shots in my career, and that is why I succeeded. And it's that he's not, I'm sure he was game to game thinking, I took 20 shots and only got 3. But generally speaking, at the end of his career, at least, he wasn't so focused on the misses. He was focused on the 20,000 points he scored and the X amount of buckets he made. And if we focus on that, that's going to keep motivating us and driving us forward, because we're not focused on the quote unquote failures.
Yeah. And that's why I think like keeping a note of the wins with OCD recovery, like what are the differences that have changed? Because often can be going, okay, what's changed? Nothing's changed. I'm still feeling anxious, still have compulsions. And it's like, okay, well, what has shifted? Have you look at your goals when we came in, you were wanting to do this, that's happened. And then it's like, oh yeah, that has actually shifted, because it's very difficult to get that perspective from in the present moment to where you were, like when you start working on this stuff.
That's true. Yeah, we can discount the progress we've made, but if you've got it written down somewhere, it's hard to discount that. And I think it'd be worth maybe talking about acceptance of intrusive thoughts, because no one really wants to accept their intrusive thoughts, especially if they're taboo and horrible in nature. And one thing I always say is, we're not, with acceptance of thoughts, we're never accepting the content of the thoughts, just the mere presence that we're having a thought. But just anything you want to say about that?
Well, I think it's exactly that. It's kind of note we can't do anything that the thought comes in, and then it's there. So it's kind of, how do we show that? I mean, it's working on irrelevance with those thoughts, isn't it? And working on that aspect of it, going, a thought is just a thought. But it can be difficult to accept those, particularly if they're at odds with, which often it is with OCD, like odds with our values, who we want to be. And so that is a challenge. And obviously with the thoughts come feelings, which are perhaps self-hatred, all that kind of stuff. So it's then working with that, and how do we set that, get back into the present moment rather than where you've been taken to with the thought. So,
Yeah, good points. And And I think that's where, with the intrusive thoughts, as you're saying, like the compassion can come back in of you're human. Humans have thoughts. Humans have thoughts they don't like all the
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah.
that just makes you human. And that's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Um, is there anything else on acceptance you wanted to bring up?
I think that's probably around about enough for
Okay.
today. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Um, so look, a couple other
Yeah.
questions then.
Yeah.
So if you could pick up the phone and call the 20-year-old Paul, what would you tell him?
Do you know what? I would give him some psychoeducation around drink or drugs and trauma and just give him like, go, you know what? This has happened to you. It's
Mm,
not surprising that you're feeling the way you're feeling. You're probably not going to listen to me, but these drink or drugs are not helping. I know they feel like they are, but when you need, when you're ready, uh, yeah, speak to someone or
yeah.
ask for help. And
Mm,
there are people out there who will help you.
mm. Even in what you're saying there, there's some acceptance that there was a timing that needed to happen for him.
Yeah.
Even if you had some magic phone line, it may not have made a difference.
I don't think it would have made a difference at all at that
Mm,
point. But I do find it surprising, and I'm pretty sure that this is the case. I didn't get anyone talking to me about my drugs or alcohol
okay.
ever until I went to AA. No GPs. No
Yeah.
one asked me when I was prescribed antidepressants. No one took a look
Really?
at me and said like, "What's going on?" It was. I mean, it was a different time. It was kind of,
Yeah.
early 2000s, but still, I just find
Mm,
it amazing.
yeah. Yeah, that
But
is amazing. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think it was the reason why I was anxious, but it was certainly compounding that,
Yeah.
it was, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So who knows?
Mm.
Maybe he would have listened if no one
Maybe
else
he
had
would.
said
I'm not
something.
sure it would have stayed with him because I
Yeah.
definitely had a few of those conversations, people saying something, and actually there was a seed in my head, and it's like, oh, right, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Cool. And then you got a billboard where you live. What do you want written on that billboard?
Um, so I'm going to go with something that's dear to my heart, which is promotion of dancing
Okay.
I think so I love dancing, and I just think it is so healing and such
Yeah.
an amazing form of connecting with people, being learning how to be okay with yourself and all that kind of stuff, and such a great expression of self-expression. And sadly, it's kind of like dance halls are disappearing from the UK and
Yeah.
lots of countries, and so we're losing that connection, that kind of like ancient tribal connection. We all used to dance around a fire and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
I would say um, dance, dance like nobody's watching with other people as much as you can.
Yeah. Maybe that's where silent discos come in.
I think
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice. I like
Mm.
that.
Mm.
And then lastly, anything else you wish you could have said or shared today?
Um, just, I think you guys are doing such a great job. It's been such a privilege to be asked to work with you guys, and the uh, work is incredibly rewarding. It's tricky at times, but it's um, brilliant work. I feel like really grateful to have the clients. The clients kind of keep me honest as well, because I know that if
Mm.
I'm like feeling anxious or avoidant in my life, I'm like, oh, my clients are doing that. I
Mm.
can't really swerve out of that one. Obviously, we will do it every now and again.
Yeah.
But I do, yeah, I find that, personal benefit as well as like professional benefit, and finding it very, very rewarding, and really happy to be working with you guys and everyone on the
Awesome.
team.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And you've took to it like a duck to water. You've done really well. So it's been great having you on the team and today on the podcast. So thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. And if you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.